Hello, I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute, an Institute for the Humanities and Alternative College and High School here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. The purpose of this broadcast is to find out why Plato matters now. And we've none better than Dr. Angie Hobbs to fill us in on this worthy question. And she has written a book of the same name, and we're going to learn all about that book and all about Dr. Hobbs's insights into this most pivotal figure in Western history. Before we do get to know those things and herself, one announcement concerning Apocatastasis, and it is approaching the guts of December here. And so that means if you're interested in enrolling, including in various of our philosophy courses, get on it, because Christmas will be here and the new year and the holiday comes and goes very quickly. So next thing you know, the spring semester will be underway. So you can find out all about that on our website under enrollment and matriculation. With that seen too, welcome Dr. Hobbs. And how are you doing today in England?
Oh, very well, thank you. And delighted to be with you. Thank you so much for having me on.
And as I get this queued up, I'm going to have the screen share. We're going to see your book title. We can, if we squint all the way across the Atlantic, see your book, Why Plato Matters Now, in the blue there, but we'll have it front and center momentarily on a digital image. And again, the information to purchase that book is down below. While I'm struggling with the buttons here, Dr. Hobbs, momentarily, tell us a bit about yourself, your academic career, your interests in writing, and that'll take us actually into a recent selection about your book and a few other philosophy books. But before we get there, just tell us a bit about yourself, and I'll get the different screenshots queued up.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, well, I initially, many years ago, I read for a degree in classics at Cambridge University, though I specialized in ancient Greek philosophy. And then I did a PhD, a doctorate in Plato and his relationship to Homer. And then I was traveling a bit. I was teaching in English in Naples. I did a lot of traveling, but then I went back and I was a research fellow at Christ's College in Cambridge, again, researching into ancient Greek philosophy, particularly Plato. I then joined a modern philosophy department at Warwick University in the UK. Again, mainly lecturing in ancient Greek philosophy, but also in modern ethics, or ethics from the ancient world right up to the present, and in applied ethics and political theory. And then in 2012, Sheffield University created a new position for me, a chair in the public understanding of philosophy. And I was teaching at Sheffield until just a few weeks ago. In fact, I've taken voluntary severance to go freelance with writing and media and policy and consultancy work. And I still advise my doctoral students. I do, as well as a lot of writing, I do a lot of media and TV and radio and podcasts and so on, as you know. And I do a lot of policy and consultancy work. So I work with the civil service in the UK and with our National Health Service and our Health Research Authority and all sorts of bodies. I've worked with the United States Air Force Training Academy in Colorado in the United States, for instance. Just whoever asks me to see where philosophy might help people clarify their concepts, ask the right questions, think through different options, different arguments, and so on. So I never tell people what to think or how to live, but I try and help people work out for themselves what they think and what they want.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Angie. And just for yourself and for the audience, if there's ever a slight delay between the back and forth of myself and the guest, it's just because I'm ticking off the mute button, and that just improves audio quality. So thank you everyone for bearing with that. And Dr. Hobbs, here we have on the screen share a recent selection of your book in these top 5 selections. So tell us about this program and or this website, as the case may be, and how they go about choosing a book, and how your one ended up apparently here, the top slot.
That's right. Yes. Well, I was really delighted and very honored to be selected last week by 5books.com. So here in I mean, you can look at the site around the world, but it's run in the UK, and it's a wonderful resource. And I'm sure your audience would want to know about 5books.com, because it recommends 5 books in all sorts of different categories if you go to their website. And every year in December, usually the philosopher Nigel Warburton is asked to select what he thinks are the best 5 philosophy books of the year, with an audience in mind who's perhaps more the general interested reader. So these are serious books, but they are also written in a way that is accessible for people who, you don't have to have a degree in philosophy to study these books. And yes, so I was really, really thrilled to have been selected.
All right, Dr. Hobbs, thank you for that insight there and your background, and also in the recent selection on the 5 books. So tell us about why Plato matters now, why this title, and indeed, as I'm sure other people have noticed, why that word now? How does that
Yes.
angle your book and its approach?
Well, thank you. I mean, so Plato always matters, and it's always a now. So Plato is always going to matter now, whatever future moment we're in. However, in this particular moment in 2025, 2026, he really matters for all sorts of reasons around the world. So we're going to talk about lots of things later. I'll just select 3 particular points immediately. He never writes in his own voice. He writes these dramatic dialogues with this very wide, varied, rich cast of characters. And for lots of reasons, that is going to help us understand how belief and character and life are intertwined. But very specifically, he uses the dialogue form to model good and bad ways of engaging in dialogue. And my goodness, I think we have a lot to learn from that right now. So we so need to get better at dialogue. And we have to realize that all sorts of players around the world, for various political and economic reasons, are trying to divide us, are trying to polarize us, are using algorithms to separate us, to feed us stuff on our social media that they think we want to see and hear. We need to relearn how to speak to each other, including perhaps especially people with whom we disagree. And to do that in a way, we don't have to ever agree with them, but we have to be respectful. We have to listen. We have to engage in constructive debate that aims at the truth, not at defeating the interlocutor as if they're an opponent. We have to have shared dialogue. And Plato really shows us ways of doing that. And he shows us ways of how not to do that. The second concept I'll pick out immediately, we'll talk more about it, is his concept of flourishing. The Greek word is eudaimonia, which literally means blessed by a good guardian spirit. It's often translated happiness, but I think that's not quite right. Happiness, we tend to think that as a subjective concept about how we feel. And there's a bit of that in eudaimonia, but it's much more objective. It's much more about, are you fulfilling your potential? Are you actualizing your faculties? Are you living a fully rich, successful human life? And that I find an enormously helpful concept. I mentioned earlier that I do work with the National Health Service and the Civil Service and all sorts of other bodies. And I try to update the concept a little bit. We might want to talk about how I do that later to make it fit in a bit more with the 21st century, but I find it really helpful because, and I think this is so important for all of us right now to remember, we can't always feel happy. It's not possible to feel happy every single minute of the day. It's sometimes not even appropriate to feel happy because sad things happen, bad things happen. But we can always try to flourish in the sense we can always ask ourselves, how can I best use my faculties, intellectual, emotional, imaginative, physical, my faculties? How can I best use them to improve the situation just that little bit, both for myself and also for my community? What can I do right now to make things just that little bit better? And Plato's really good at helping us think through that. And the third thing I'll just mention immediately, again, we can come back and talk about all of this later. Though Plato himself, well, as I said, he doesn't speak in his own voice. We never know for sure exactly what he thinks, but it does seem as if he was not the greatest fan of Athenian democracy, which was a direct democracy. It wasn't, we have representational democracy in the world now where we have it at all on the whole. But they didn't have that. They had direct democracy where the adult male citizens, no women, I'm afraid, actively voted on different laws, and most of the senior positions were decided by lot. You could wake up the next morning and I could be Chancellor of the Exchequer, and that would not go well. So he's not a great fan of that. And fair enough, he saw this democracy, this Athenian democracy, put his beloved friend and mentor Socrates to death in 399 BCE. They voted him to death. So Plato realizes democracies can make mistakes, and he gives us a really interesting and challenging analysis of democracies, its strengths as well as its weaknesses. He does this in many dialogues, particularly in the Republic. But, and here's a point which we might want to remember now, though he's not the biggest fan of direct democracy, he does think it's greatly preferable to tyranny, of which he had had direct experience in his life at the court of the tyrant Dionysius I in Syracuse in Sicily, where Plato only just escaped with his life, having criticized tyranny to the tyrant. And Plato in the Republic gives us this extraordinarily incisive analysis of how a democracy can be subverted to tyranny by a cynical and opportunistic demagogue. And those of us who, even if we ourselves see the shortcomings of democracy, those of us who want to try to hang on to it in some way, we should listen to Plato's warning, and we should take action about the things he thinks we need to do to protect ourselves. And I think that's a lesson around the world at the moment, where we see authoritarianism on the rise everywhere. So those are just three things: dialogue, flourishing, analysis of democracy and tyranny. There's much more we'll be discussing, but those are just three initial points.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Angie. And I wonder, in your research, your writing, your teaching, has there been anyone who's approached the interests that you have in Plato? Has there been any other philosopher or figure in the past that comes up to quite that level, or has it always been this real spotlight on certainly one of the most famous and far-sung philosophers in history? Has it been Plato only, or has someone else been on his heels for your interest?
For me, I love a lot of the ancient Greek and Roman philosophers. I've taught all the pre-Socratics, Heraclitus, Zeno. I've taught Democritus. I've taught Aristotle. I've taught the Stoics, who of course inherited a lot of their philosophy from Plato and then fed into Christianity. The Epicureans, the Cynics. I mean, I love all of them, but it has. And I've taught all of them for 40 years. It is interesting, though, that it is Plato I come back to again and again. And we're going to see certain reasons for that, because he is the one who, for him, the basic ethical questions are, how should I live and what sort of person should I be? absolutely basic questions. And he thinks those are fundamental, even before you ask, should I be a moral person? Should I be a good person? He thinks those are secondary questions. And he wants to argue, of course, that we have the best life, the most flourishing life, if we are moral. And he argues for that very strongly. But he thinks, okay, I've got to convince people of that. Let's just start with something we can all agree on, which is, I want to live a flourishing life. I want to have a good life. And let's start from there. And the way he does this, his analysis of moral psychology and how that feeds in, it's so revolutionary. I mean, he influences Freud a lot, and Freud, I think, calls Plato divine and tries to translate bits of Plato. And Freud says he gets quite a few of his theories from Plato and is very influenced by Platonic psychology and theories about love. So he really is seminal. And again, we will be in the Republic. He, for the first time, as far as I'm aware of in Western thought, when he's discussing the nature of justice, but previously justice had been defined in terms of your actions, how you treat other people. Do you treat other people fairly and decently? And, Plato agrees with that, but he says, no, actually, justice is an interior state of your soul, of your psyche. So for the first time, as far as I'm aware, he internalizes this notion of justice and morality and says it's the actions flow from the inner state of your soul, of your psyche. And that's what you've got to start working on. Now, that is a really important turning point in Western thought. So for these reasons, though I love all the others I've talked about, and I get a lot from them and I still read them, and indeed many modern philosophers too, John Stuart Mill, and even philosophers I disagree with, like Nietzsche, I still enjoy reading Nietzsche and get a lot from him. However, it is Plato I come back to again and again. He really is a game changer for me in so many ways in Western thought.
Great, thank you for that. And it is remarkable, with my history interest, how much we've lost in the past. There are books out there, this. There are books in the ancient world, the medieval world. We only know them because it's in some other book. We've lost that. We've lost so much from different philosophers. It is remarkable that so much of this man's corpus has been preserved over such a long time period, and for him to have such an influence.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's because people he was famous in his own lifetime. People did realize immediately that he was something extraordinary. And after his years of traveling, he comes back, and in about 387 BCE, he sets up his academy in Athens, which is the West's first sort of higher education and research institute. And people come to study with him from all over the Greek world, which, as you know, it isn't just modern day Greece, but was all around the shores of the Black Sea and the current Middle East and North Africa and Spain and southern Italy and Sicily and so on. And famous, books like the Republic. And of course, these were copied by hand. This was, immensely laborious, had to be copied on papyrus. So expensive and difficult to copy, but it became famous very quickly and was distributed. And we know that within 100 years, at least, if not earlier, there's a copy of Plato's Republic in the famous library in Alexandria on the coast of Egypt. So people did realize that they were dealing with something very special here. And for also, and as I'm sure we'll discuss, he's taken up by the early Christians. And then Platonism itself develops through Neoplatonism, and there's a direct link which runs on through the Middle Ages into the Renaissance. Scholars like Marsilio Ficino in Florence, but also all the religions, as I'm sure we'll discuss. So the early Christians are really fascinated by Plato. Islam is respectful of Plato, Judaism, and so on. So there's a very happy, and I wish we could get back to that in the modern world. We're talking about dialogue. There's a very happy period of at least 8, 9, 10 years when Christian and Judaic and later Islamic philosophers, and indeed the philosophers who still subscribe to the ancient Greek and Roman religions, we call them pagans now. That's a little bit disrespectful, actually. They didn't think of themselves as pagans. They're all conversing with each other. They're writing to each other. They're going to study with each other and listen to each other speak. So it can be done. The world needs to remember that people of different faiths and beliefs are able to converse in a respectful and civilized and an enriching way. And we've done it before, and let's hope we can do it again.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Now, Angie, what does your book, of all the many, many texts on Plato going back every year must have a few books on the fella put out. What does your book have? Why Plato matters now? What does your book have that other books on Plato haven't quite focused on? What makes your text unique?
Okay, so I've obviously read, I've read a lot of academic books on Plato, and I've written one or two, and I write a lot of academic articles on Plato, but I also read a lot of the books on Plato written for a more general audience, because I wanted to do something fresh and distinctive and new. And most of the introductions to Plato are, and there are some excellent ones out there. I'm not at all being disrespectful of them. It's really great. But they tend to focus on dialogue by dialogue. There's chapters on different dialogues, and often in a sort of roughly chronological order. And what I wanted to do, and what happily Bloomsbury, the publisher, wanted me to do, as this is indeed part of a series on why certain philosophers matter now, is literally look, why should somebody in the 21st century still read Plato? What current concerns does he speak to? And as I said, in so many ways, we've talked about dialogue and flourishing and democracy and tyranny, but many others, his analysis of heroism and celebrity and money, his very searching and beautiful reflections on erotic and romantic love and on friendship, his very challenging pronouncements on the dangers of art, and his apparent, or I think possibly slightly ironic, advocation of censorship in the Republic, but also his powerful commitment to beauty and the importance of beauty in our lives and the importance of myth, his creation of the Atlantis legend. I mean, so much. And of course his lifelong debate he has with the rhetoricians of his day, the sophists. They're called the sophists, these professional teachers of philosophy and rhetoric who go around the Greek world teaching the sons of rich fathers how to get ahead in public life, which in those days meant being able to speak in public. To have a successful career, you needed to be able to speak effectively in the assemblies and the law courts. And that oratory was a key thing. And what the sophists do, or so Plato claims, is teach their students how to win a debate by any means, fair or foul. And that's what Plato has issue with, that you shouldn't be just trying to win and defeat your opponent, if necessary by fallacious reasoning or verbal skullduggery or bullying or intimidation. No, says Plato, that all of you should be collaborating to try to search for the truth together. The aim is not victory in debate, but truth. And so absolutely, these were the things, and I thought, my goodness, these are lessons which the world can learn a lot from now. And you, as I argue in the book, there are aspects of Plato's philosophy which most people now wouldn't agree with, which I don't agree with. I mean, he has a metaphysical theory which says nothing in this world around us, the phenomenal world around us, is truly real, and reality lies elsewhere in this transcendent realm of perfect forms of justice and goodness and beauty and so on. Now, not many people now believe in the forms. And what I try to argue in the book is That's okay. You don't have to believe in Plato's theory of forms to learn a lot from Plato. You don't have to agree with his very scathing attack of democracy, though in fact quite a few of his criticisms of democracy are, I think, pertinent, and we need to strengthen and improve democracy. It's not perfect, is it? You don't have to agree with everything in Plato to get a lot from him and to his lessons really resonate. So that is what I wanted to do. So in each chapter, though I do include some scholarship and some references, and I try to show at least a little of my workings, though not in the way I would in a fully academic article, but I do try and give the reader the ability to critique me and to go and work out, read what my sources and to see if they agree with me. But in each chapter, I don't just talk about Plato's arguments and ideas. I also try to relate them to absolutely current debates going on. I was writing the book mainly in 2024, but sadly, a lot of the problems are still with us, and indeed, in some cases, worse. So that is what I wanted to do, in which though a lot of the other works on Plato make allusions to current debates, but I wasn't aware of a book which was saying, this is exactly what's happening now. I mean, there are books. I think I'm trying to remember what it's called. Is it called Plato at the Googleplex? Possibly. Anyway, I mean, there are other books out there which do some of this, but I wasn't. But also, there in a few years ago, there wasn't one literally looking at contemporary challenges and saying we need. I mentioned wars in Ukraine and Gaza and Sudan, for instance, and sort of say we absolutely need this now. It's relevant right now. By now, I mean this very second.
Great. Thank you for that, Angie. And in your research, obviously, you don't just know more about Plato than the average Joe. I mean, this is your work. And still in all, when you were writing this text, Why Plato Matters Now, in 24, and we, those of us who are writers, I'm sure many of the audience have at least dabbled in writing, know how much time that is and how it can become its own world. It can subsume one's life, indeed. But what did you learn? You obviously have a massive corpus of knowledge of the man getting into this project. But what did you learn in the writing process, however long it took you, that you did not know before about Plato?
That is such a good question. And I did learn stuff. And I really was grateful to that whole process. I wanted to interweave into the analysis of his arguments and ideas, bits about Plato's life and his times and what was going on in Athens at the time. And I set out to do that because I wanted the reader to have some context about what mattered to Plato and where he was coming from and what was shaping him. And also because I knew it would make for a more enjoyable read. And Plato had an extraordinarily eventful life. He didn't want an eventful life, but he had a very eventful life, with very colourful life. Now, during that, I realized just how intertwined Plato's beliefs and ideas and arguments are with the context of his own life. I mean, I knew that a bit beforehand, but when I went into his life in detail, I really saw the interconnection between belief and character and life. And of course, that is part of his own approach in his dialogue form and his ethics and small p politics of flourishing. When I talk about the politics of flourishing, I don't mean a political party or whether you're left or right wing. I mean as it pertaining to the polis, the city state. So it wasn't it didn't surprise me, but what was new to me was just how shaped he was. So he grew up in a bitter civil war in Greece between Athens and Sparta. And their respective allies, and so it was torn apart, and Athens lost completely in 404 BCE. Plato was probably born about 428, 427. So his youth was affected by that terrible war, and including plague and famine and really awful conditions in Athens and then defeat. But also there was a battle within Athens itself between different political factions, the Democrats and the oligarchs. And that battle was played out within Plato's own family. He had relatives on the Democratic side and relatives on the oligarchic side. So it's not a surprise that in his political theory as an adult, his overarching aim is social harmony. That is his overarching goal. How can we all best peacefully coexist? But it really brought it home to me. The other thing that really came home to me was, I knew about his mystical side, and he's very interested in mystical religions such as that at Eleusis, the sort of fertility religion of the goddess Demeter there. And then when he traveled in southern Italy and Sicily, the mystery religions of the Western Greek world, the Orphic religions and the Orphic Pythagorean mix there. So I did know that before. But again, when I researched his life and wrote about it in detail, it really brought home to me how deeply, deeply religious Plato was. And indeed, how there was a very strong mystical side to him, which feeds on into the strain we get in the Neoplatonists, and that often feeds into early Christianity and medieval Judaism and so on. So that deeply religious man. Now, that does not mean to say he necessarily believed in the official state religion of the Olympian Greek gods. He circumspectly sometimes talks about the gods and writes about the official Greek gods like Zeus and Demeter and Dionysus and Athena and so on. But he also, at times when he's writing his most profoundly religious passages, I noticed he switches from the plural to the singular and writes about God in the singular. I think Plato was at heart a monotheist, and that's certainly what the early Christians thought of him. So yes, so really researching his life and how that intertwines with his thought, it brought the man alive to me, and it made me very, very sympathetic to him. Yes, there's plenty in Plato I disagree with, but that's fine. The man I found very lovable, and a man I came away respecting and loving him more at the end of. I started writing the book in 2022 and handed in the manuscript at the end of 24, and then spent 6 months at the beginning of 25, as we all do, correcting the manuscript, going through copy editing and proofs and so on. So you might think I would have absolutely have had enough of Plato, but no, I love him more now. And he survived that period of intense scrutiny.
Very good, Angie. Thank you for that and that insight, because like so much of history, literature, philosophy, we think we know something, and there's always more to learn. And I suppose that's the intellectual life, and that's life is available to anybody, especially in the world of mass media and mass publications and so forth. So it's always an exciting adventure there. Now, speaking of adventure, our next topic, and this in fact takes up a whole chapter. Not going to put you on the spot here. I think it's chapter 5, but everyone's going to buy the book and they can find out. But there is a whole chapter on Plato and heroism. So I'd like to read a little bit here from early on in that chapter, and then perhaps you can give us some insights into this topic. Homer and heroism, two kinds of hero. Which characters then are particularly admired in the culture in which Plato grows up? Even at the turn of the 5th and 4th centuries, they are still heroic warriors of the Trojan War and its aftermath, especially as depicted in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, and Achilles and Odysseus above all. Yet despite the fact that both Achilles and Odysseus are courageous and skilled fighters, they are very different and largely admired for contrasting reasons. Achilles is praised for knowingly choosing a glorious early death over return to Phthia and a long life, whereas Odysseus is lauded for precisely the opposite reason, for deploying all his resourcefulness and wiles, not only to help the Greeks defeat the Trojans through the strategy of the Trojan horse, but also to survive all the challenges and admittedly enjoyable opportunities of the following 10 years of being buffeted around the Mediterranean, and finally making it home to Ithaca and his long suffering wife, Penelope. It is my aim in this chapter to show how a careful consideration of Plato's treatment of the Homeric heroes, and particularly Achilles and Odysseus, can assist us with a number of contemporary debates concerning heroism and fame, both general concerns about the corruption of the concepts of heroism and hero, and specifically about statues, memorials, and state honors. First, however, we need briefly to remind ourselves of how Homer himself depicts them. All right, so take it away there, Angie. What does Plato have to shine a light on when it comes to heroism, especially using the Homeric heroes?
Okay, thank you. I mean, this is such a rich topic. Thank you. So Plato, there's lots of reasons why he wants to address the topic of heroism and heroes, partly because he knows that the Greek youths of his day, that's what they're growing up on, these stories of the Trojan Wars and these heroes. It's a hero culture. And some of them, his students, want to be heroes themselves. Others want to admire or emulate certain heroes. It is a hero culture anyway. Now, in Plato's psychology, and at this stage of his life, because in the middle period of his life, he has a tripartite psychology where the psyche he divides into three faculties. There's reason, which desires truth and reality. There's an appetitive part, which desires physical satisfactions and the material goods needed to supply them and money. But then there's this third faculty, which he calls the thumoides, which he says is very important and often overlooked, and it desires honor, respect, fame, glory, success. It's a really important division, and Freud takes it up later in his ego, superego, and the id. Now, Plato says if you long for glory and honor, the easiest way to do that is to emulate the characters who are already honored in your society. If you want honor too, emulate the people your society already honors, whether they're historical or mythical or literary or whoever. And Plato says that is great if your society honors the right kind of people, because then that will help you be your best self. But if your society honors the wrong kind of people, then you're in real trouble and you're going to be given permission to be your worst self. So Plato says it really matters. He said we have this faculty in us which really desires honor and glory and therefore cares about heroes. And it really matters who we choose as our heroes. Who an individual or a society picks as their hero or heroes tells you a huge amount about them. Very revealing. So he says, we'd better get it right. We'd better have the right heroes. So he takes the two seminal poems in his culture, the Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. I would say probably written in actually by two different master hands, but never mind that for this podcast. But anyway, and Achilles, the main hero of the Iliad, and Odysseus, the main hero of the Odyssey. And he says, well, actually, they're both really problematic in different ways, particularly Achilles. Yes, Achilles is the bravest fighter and very courageous and very skilled and the fastest runner. And he's very intelligent and he's charismatic and he's beautiful. But my goodness me, he's very insubordinate. He disobeys his commander Agamemnon. He challenges the gods at times. He has a terrible temper. I mean, the whole of the Iliad is because revolves around the plot where Achilles is in a fury because he feels he's been dishonored by his commander Agamemnon, and he goes on strike. He refuses to fight, and all hell breaks loose for the Greek army. And he he gets real rage and bloodlust, and he can, when the sort of mood comes upon him, he commits terrible war crimes, which are even seen as sacrilegious and terrible within the context of the Iliad itself. So Plato says this is a terrible role model for our young guardian auxiliaries in our ideally just state, the people who are going to go on to be the military class in the state. This is a terrible role model for them. This is not what a soldier should be. A soldier should be disciplined and obedient and self-controlled. And in the Republic, Achilles, he's initially censored, and eventually at the end of the Republic, he seems to be banished altogether. Odysseus fares a bit better because Plato can see some links between Odysseus and his hero Socrates. They're both all enduring and resourceful. But again, Odysseus has his problems. He's lustful, he's greedy, and so on. He's not a perfect role model. So Plato takes these and scrutinizes them, but he doesn't say, and as Achilles gets kind of chucked out as a role model and Odysseus gets purified. However, Plato doesn't want to get rid of the notion of a hero. He thinks hero and heroism have potency, have value, that if we use the concepts correctly and form the right heroes, they can help us, as I've said, increase our moral ambition and be our best selves. So what Plato tries to do is extend the concept, and he extends it crucially beyond the battlefield. He's not against battlefields. He himself was a trained soldier. He almost certainly fought in wars himself. He certainly had periods of military service. He wasn't a pacifist, but he wants to extend the concept of the hero beyond the battlefield to include those who risk or give their lives for social justice and for truth, as of course Socrates did. Socrates, the philosopher Socrates, was put to death for allegedly refusing to believe in the city's gods, for introducing new divine beings, and for corrupting the young. In reality, it was a political show trial. He was basically put to death because he had political enemies. But Socrates, he could have escaped, he could have got off with a fine or exile, but he said, no, I've devoted my life to philosophy. I'm not going to give up that now. So he died in his belief in truth and philosophy. And Plato absolutely presents Socrates as a hero throughout the dialogues, but other characters too. So it's Plato wants to keep the concepts of heroism and honor, but he wants us to think hard about them. Who should we really regard as a hero? Who deserves to be honored? And he certainly would want to distinguish between a hero and a celebrity. And I think that's a really important distinction right now. I mean, my goodness, he would definitely say to us, these celebrities of yours, what have they done or created that's worth celebrating? Some of them have, maybe, but many of them haven't. And he wouldn't want the term hero debased or corrupted by merging it with celebrity or by just using it too cheaply. When I was researching this book, I came across some very depressing terms. Chip shop heroes, face cream heroes. The word is so debased. And also, one can see certain politicians and business people, they definitely exploit the term for their own political and economic aims. If a military or political commander makes some huge mistake, and as a result of their terrible mistake, innocent civilians or military get killed, just you check how quickly they call the fallen heroes. Now, the people who accidentally were killed may or may not have been heroes. They probably in most cases weren't. But to deflect attention from their own mistakes, they will say, oh, they died as heroes. No, they died because you made a mistake. So it's a term that is often abused and corrupted. And again, in newspapers, often for economic reasons. But Plato says, okay, but let's not get rid of it. It's a useful term. It can inspire us. Having the right heroes, whether we want to be a hero ourselves or whether we just want to emulate and be motivated by other heroes, it can be inspirational. We keep the term. We keep notions of honor. They're important terms in our moral armory, but we need to think hard about them and cleanse them of the rubbish, the stuff that accretes to them, which is really nothing to do with heroism or honor. And I simply don't know of any philosopher who has interrogated the terms of hero, heroism, honor, honoring, glory, and so on as rigorously as Plato has done. And I think it just gives us lots to think about for our own celebrity culture, our kind of cheap, quick fame culture. But also we're having all these debates. We certainly are in the UK. I know you are in the US as well, but around the world. Who deserves a statue? Who deserves a memorial? Who deserves a state medal? So we're having these big debates, and Plato can help us think through all that.
Great. Thank you for that, Angie. The look at heroism and Plato. And boy, oh boy, we have misplaced our heroic ideals and idols in our day. We won't even approach the misuse of the word love in our society. In America, the other night on the television, I heard that, I don't know if you know this, but you spell love on a commercial, Toyota. The the commercial guy asked, "How do you spell love?" And it was a Toyota commercial. So we'll save that. We'll lasso you down the road for those other platonic meditations.
Okay, no comment on that one. My goodness.
Roger that. Roger that. But Angie, a really ripe question that I thought as we were preparing our conversation here over the past few weeks is the influence of Plato on religions in general, maybe Abrahamistic religions. I can speak with a little bit of knowledge about Christianity. On the, I mean, it's almost a love-hate relationship in the sense that I find it impossible and to understand something like St. John in the New Testament or the Epistle to the Hebrews without understanding Platonism. And it would seem to me very obvious influences of the ideas of logos and whatever. And yet I also know certain church fathers have statements, and I don't know which one said this, that, Plato is the origin of all heresies, as the Christians would phrase it. So it is this, and yet also going back, I know St. Augustine, his understanding of Platonism helped him grasp that. And I'm sure there's a similar toss-up in Islam and Judaism and so forth. So what do you know about the influence of Plato, his writings, on later religions, Abrahamistic religions, and other traditions as well?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I mean, such a rich seam to explore. Yes, yeah, not all the early Christians were fans of Plato, because obviously he wasn't a Christian, but many were, and more were than were not. And I think there are several reasons for this. So, particularly in Alexandria, that very famous city in the north of Egypt, where there was a very, very rich, cultured Greek community, including so-called pagans, but also Christians and Jews. So very early on, we've got Origen in Alexandria and his teacher Clement of Alexandria, both very influenced by Plato. I mean, Clement actually said that sort of truth had been kind of relayed, philosophy had been relayed to the Greeks as a forerunner for Christianity. It was sort of laying the foundations for Christianity. Now, why does he say that? Well, they're really interested in Plato's belief that reality, as we've discussed, does not lie ultimately in this world around us, what we call the phenomenal world or the world of our senses, but in this transcendent realm of the forms of beauty and goodness and justice. And quite a few of these early Christians sort of saw Plato's depiction of the ascent up the ladder of love in his dialogue, The Symposium, towards the form of beauty. And they kind of put the Christian God at the top of the ladder, but they use that notion of a divine ascent, moving ever away from this phenomenal world. So they deeply responded to the strong religious and mystical elements in Plato and his belief in an incorporeal reality. But also, they were very struck by how Plato, and he was following his mentor, the historic Socrates here, argued very powerfully that you should never return wrong for wrong. Now this, and we know Plato and says this several times, and we know the historic Socrates said this, that Plato says it is not the part of a good man or good human ever to return wrong for wrong. Now that was an absolutely revolutionary thing to say at the turn of the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, because before that, in the Homeric world we've been discussing, it was an ethic of revenge. You help your friends and you harm your enemies. You do return wrong for wrong. The revenge is part of the ethic. And Socrates and then Plato are saying, no, you do not return wrong for wrong. If somebody wrongs you, you do not wrong them back. That doesn't mean you have to be a pacifist. They both fought in wars, but you do it not out of revenge, but to defend your community and maybe to bring justice to your aggressor. You never act out of a spirit of revenge or spite. And that, of course, prefigures St. Matthew's Sermon on the Mount. And early Christian writers recognized that. And another big link is that Plato and Platonism fed directly into a philosophy that developed shortly afterwards, the Stoic philosophy. And the Stoic philosophy intertwines with early Christianity in lots of ways. But by doing that, I mean, the Stoic Seneca, for instance, in ancient Rome was sort of said to be one of us by early Christian writers. So, but the Stoicism itself owes a huge amount to Plato. So you've got these links between Platonism and Stoicism and Christianity, both arguing that the flourishing life, the good life, is the moral life, and that there is nothing more precious or important than the good of your own soul and taking care of that. And Plato says that only you can harm your own soul. Other people can harm your body. They can even kill your body. They can take away your material possessions. But you are the only person in the whole world who can harm your own soul. And you do that by wronging others. So, I mean, a very powerful thing to say. And again, a revolutionary thing to say when Plato was writing. But you can see why early Christian writers like Origen and Clement of Alexandria really responded to that. And you've mentioned Augustine again. Augustine absolutely tries to intertwine Christianity with Platonism, and again this notion of the incorporeality and the importance of transcendence. By this time, the early Christian writers are influenced not just by Plato, but by the development of Plato in the Neoplatonists, such as Plotinus and Porphyry and Iamblichus and Proclus. And in the Neoplatonists in particular, there's this theory of emanation, which allows the divine one in Neoplatonism to connect with the created corporeal world around us. And again, early Christian writers found that very important. Now, also around this time, at around the turn of the Common Era and before the Common Era, you have the Greek Jewish writer in Alexandria, Philo of Alexandria. I mentioned there is this mix of Jewish and then later Christian and what we would call pagan writers, all interconnecting. Now, Philo is really interesting in trying to blend his Judaism, or his second temple Judaism, with ancient Greek philosophy, and particularly with Platonism. So he's really engaging in this. And what is so interesting is that these people are attending each other's lectures and so on. So a little bit after Philo, you've got the Neoplatonist writer Porphyry coming to Alexandria to hear the Christian Origen lecturing. And Origen, in his teaching, he says he tries to employ the Socratic questioning technique, dialogue technique that we've been talking about, to teach his students. You don't just tell people stuff, you try to teach them how to think, how to question. That's the important thing. So really rich. And then, of course, you have Islam, and that's so interesting. So quite a number of the absolutely crucial Islamic philosophers, many of whom living in southern Spain, when of course it was Islamic, in the sort of 8th, 9th, 10th centuries Common Era. Quite a few of them, I mean, we owe a lot of ancient Greek philosophy, by the way, to these Islamic scholars who were preserving it and translating it. And quite a few of them, not all of them, but quite a few of them were fans of Plato, particularly Al-Farabi, really influenced by the mystical side of Plato, and really tries to blend, again, Islam and Platonism, just as Augustine had tried to blend Christianity and Platonism. And Ibn Sina is another one, also known as Avicenna. So again, you've got this fertile cross-cultural exchange, respectful. And even when they don't all agree, I mean, another Islamic scholar of the time, who are very famous now, Ibn Rushd, or Averroes, he loved Greek philosophy and he studied Plato, but he wasn't a Platonist. He followed Aristotle. But again, even when they disagree, they are respectful, they are knowledgeable, they study, they read the works by philosophers of different religions. So yes, and then as I said, in Judaism, I said Philo is the sort of the main link. You have medieval Judaic scholars such as Maimonides, but he was really influenced by Aristotle rather than Plato. But then right on into the Renaissance, you have Christian writers like Ficino in Florence at the end of the 15th century, a priest, medically trained, a sort of a magician, though he had to do that on the quiet because it was illegal at the time, and an astrologer and an extraordinary writer. But again, he's enormously, his work's absolutely infused with Plato and Platonism, as well, of course, of his Christianity. He was a priest. So it absolutely fascinates me that for really 1,500 years, it was regarded not just as possible to try to create these fusions of different beliefs, but it was regarded as just necessary to know about the different philosophies and the different religions. If you called yourself an educated and cultured person, you were expected to at least have read some of this stuff and have paid attention to it and engaged with it respectfully, even if it wasn't your own particular belief set or religion. And I find that is something I would love us to get back to. Respectful knowledge of other people's beliefs. But yes, so yes, Plato's the transcendence, the incorporeality, the belief you should never return wrong for wrong, the belief that the good life and the moral life are the same interior state of your psyche, all these things hugely influential.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Angie. And so as we bring the bird down for this interview, we should hope to have you down the road to follow up on so many topics related to Plato and philosophy in general. But the final question, having wet our whistle over the past hour, is where can people best and most justly purchase your book? What is your preferred way and website for people to do that?
Oh, thank you. Yes. So my website is angiehobbs.com, ANGIE.com. And at the top there, you will get information. There's a link tree with different ways of ordering the book. I think I've put at the very top various ways of getting it from independent bookstores. I always try to encourage readers to see if they can get a book and support an independent bookstore near them or online, because we need to cherish them. But there are plenty of ways, and of course the Bloomsbury site and the sites that we all know about for ordering books. But and in fact, I think at the moment, Bloomsbury are doing a special offer. I can't remember how much. I think there is a discount in the run up to Christmas. So right now, maybe look at the Bloomsbury site and you might get a discount.
I will put those down below in the description for everyone to do their due diligence and get a copy of Why Plato Matters Now. Dr. Angie Hobbs, thank you very much for your insights into this very, very fascinating perennial topic.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure discussing Plato with you. And happy Christmas to you and all